Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Mr. Ainsworth, and we're going to get into a little mind map review of all the concepts of how to factor polynomials of all types. Okay, so what you need to do first, go to Canvas, all right, find your mind map, all right, with the same title up there. Okay, MM2 stands for mind map. All right, and we're going to go through all the different things you've learned in the last couple of weeks when it comes to factoring polynomials, going all the way back to the beginning. And so this is a video, so use it properly, okay? And what I mean properly is that you should be going at your own pace, which means you should be pausing, playing, all right, and rewind if you need to hear it again, all right, and go at your own pace. A lot of people just copy when they watch videos, but that doesn't help you, all right? So go at your own pace and use it properly, all right? Because you want to actually have a good learning experience, right? So make sure you do that. Okay, so going back to the very beginning, the very first lesson here, I started off with factor pairs. All right, and just give me all the possible factor pairs for these real numbers. And so obviously, you always start off with 1 times the number itself. That's the first basic factor pair. 1 times 24 is usually 24. 24 is even, so 2 divides in it. So 2 times 12, it's divisible by 3. 3 times 8, it's divisible by 4. 4 times 6. And that's it. Okay, so write all factor pairs for each of the numbers. Okay, these are called factor pairs. Factor pairs. Remember, obviously, pair means 2. What 2 numbers multiply to the number? Okay, that's why they're called factor pairs. And each one is called a factor, right? So just going over basic lingo that we've been learning actually ever since you were like probably in 3rd grade when you started learning how to multiply. Right? So this is just basic skills. All right, for 36, all right, well, that's 1 times 36, 2 times 18, right? 3 times 12, okay? 4 times 9, again, just basic multiplication here, and 6 times 6. So these are called factor pairs of the number, and these are important when it comes to factoring polynomials, and that's why we got to go back to the basics. All right, now you can factor monomials too. Monomial means single term. All right, mono means single term polynomials. They're called monomials. Binomials have 2 terms, trinomials have 3 terms. And when you're beyond 3 terms, usually people just say polynomial, poly meaning many. All right, so what are all the different ways to factor x to the 4th power? Well, one way is to understand that x times x cubed, all right, is obviously x to the 4th. Because remember, we add exponents here when you multiply like variables. You can take x squared times x squared and still get x to the 4th. And then, well, let me see, you can go 1 times x to the 4th. I guess you could do that. And then what else? You can go x cubed, all right, times x. You can switch the order. All right, you can get creative right there. For 8x cubed, there's a lot of different ways you can factor this. All right, you can go 8 times x cubed. There's your first basic factoring. You can split the 8. Okay, you can get a factor pair of 8. So 2 times, or 2x times 4x squared. Those are factor pairs. Or you could switch it. You can go 4x squared times 2x. Many different ways you can factor the monomial. So just get creative. And remember, when you multiply like variables, you add exponents. Okay. So when multiplying, all right, like variables, what you do is you add exponents. This goes back to the previous unit, okay, just back to basic skills, basic polynomial skills that we reviewed in the previous unit. All right, how to factor out the GCF. So here we go. This is an important one here because this is involved in everything. All right, so muy importante, as they say. So here I see that 2 is a factor of both 4 and 6. So I need to factor out at least a 2. I see that x is a factor of x squared, so I need to factor out the x as well. So the GCF here is actually 2x, all right? Now, when you factor it out, you can think of it 2 different ways. You can think of it using multiplication. I know that 2x times 2x gives me the 4x squared, minus 2x times 3 gives me the 6x. And so when you take your GCF here, which is the 2x here, you want to distribute through, all right, to check. All right, distribute through to check. Distribute to check your factoring. All right, just to keep that in mind. Now we always do that in class, okay? Now when the lead term's negative, all right, you want to factor out a negative. All right, so when you do that here, let's take a look at this here. I know that 3 divides, or 3 is a factor of 3 and 12. Okay, if the small number is a factor of the big number, then that becomes the GCF. Okay, it's negative though, so I'm going to factor out the negative 3. I know that y is a factor of y squared, so I need to factor out the y as well. So here we go. So negative 3y times y gives you the first term, negative 3y squared, and negative 3y times a negative 4 will give you your positive 12y squared. So distribute back through to check your work. On the next one here, they're both negative, so we're going to factor out a negative. They both have a factor of x, so I'm just going to factor out a negative x. And when you do that, negative x times x gives you the first term, and negative x times 1 will give you the next term right here. Okay, so again, when you factor out a term out of a binomial, you have a binomial remaining. And again, distribute through to check your work. You can do the same thing for trinomials. If they all have a common factor, like 5, 10, and 25 all have a factor of 5, not x. They don't all have x involved, so you can't factor out an x, okay? Because obviously minus 25 is a constant, which does not involve x. So you can't factor out x, but you can factor out a 5 because they're all divisible by 5, right? So 5 times x squared plus, let me see, x squared plus 2x here. 5 times 2x is 10x, and then 5 times a minus 5 will give you a minus 25. Again, you're factoring out what's called the GCF. All right, now on the next one here, they're all divisible by 2, right? 2 is a factor of 2, 6, and 18. So factor out the 2. So what you get is 2 times y squared minus 3y. 2 times minus 3y is minus 6y. And 2 times a minus 9 gives you a minus 18. That skill right there, factoring out the GCF, is super important because we're going to get involved right now, okay? So when it comes to factor by grouping, all right, we factor out the GCF 3 times. All right, so let's go in order here, and let's go up to number 4. This is all from previous lessons. We have a cubic polynomial here, and what we want to do is take a look at the first group here, and then the second group here, and factor out the GCF. Okay, factor out, all right, the GCF each time. That's why I talked about that just a minute ago. So out of each group. So what's involved? So here, x squared is a factor of x cubed. Why? Because x cubed, guess what? It can be rewritten as x squared, all right, times x. We know that. So the variable with the smaller exponent is always a factor of the one with a higher exponent. So factor out the x squared, and you get x squared times x plus 3. 4 is a factor of 4 and 12, so factor out the 4. Make sure you bring down the plus sign right there. Okay, now when it comes to factor by grouping, this is called factor by grouping. Factor by grouping, we had multiple full lessons of this, okay? So take a look at your notes right there. That's the technique, right? You factored out the common factor, factor out the GCF. And then what you want to do is you want to factor out the common binomial. So we have to factor out the GCF 3 times. We just did it twice. Now we do it for the 3rd time. All right, we factor out the x plus 3 because guess what? They have that in common. And then out of the remaining factors here, we have x squared plus 4, and that goes in the second binomial. So you got to multiply it by x squared plus 4. All right, check your notes. We did a full lesson on cubic polynomials when we were learning the technique called factor by grouping. Now at this point, you guys should be pausing and playing, right? If you're actually doing this correctly here, you're just not copying. You should be going at your own pace. I would try this. I'd pause the video right here and go through this next one, and then press play and check your work. All right, that's how you use the video properly. So go for it. Okay, I'm going to assume that you have already done this. Okay, so let's first group and then second group here. All right, so let's factor out a 4n squared because 4 is a factor of 4 and 8, and squared is a factor of n cubed. So you have 4n squared times n will give you the first term, and then 4n squared times 2 will give you the 8n squared. On the second group, I'm going to factor out a -5 because it's negative right there. And then I've got n plus 2 remaining. All right, distribute back through to check. And then, of course, as I was saying earlier here, we have an n plus 2 in common, so factor that out. So we have an n plus 2 in common, and you always multiply it by the remaining factors, as I said in the previous example, and that's 4n squared minus 5. Always multiply it by the remaining factors. Okay, and if you want to multiply those binomials to check, be my guest. That's what we do in class. Okay, you guys know how to do that, and so you can check your factoring at any time by simply multiplying, and you should get the original polynomial. Okay, now let's switch to trinomials where the lead coefficient is 1. All right, factoring quadratics, which are second-degree trinomials. Okay, so x squared minus 14x plus 14. So here we want to figure out what two numbers multiply to 49. So I'm going to put a times symbol up here and add to a -14. And we got to play this little number game here. All right, and so I know 7 times 7 is 49. Okay, those are the factors of 49. They both have to be negative, though, to get a -14. -7 plus -7 is -14. And a negative times a negative is a positive. So what I want to do here is I'm going to split the middle term as I taught you guys in class. So split the middle term into two terms. I'm talking about the -7x and a -7x is a -14x here. So I'm going to split the middle term. So we've got x squared here, -7x, -7x, and then we have this plus 49. So you split the middle term into two terms, okay? Split middle term. All right, and now you do factor by grouping. So here we go again. So we got to factor out the x, and you get x minus 7 out of the first group here. Again, this is first group, and this is second group here, okay? So on the second group, I got to factor out the -7 because it's negative. So factor it out, and you get x minus 7. And notice the binomials are the same. So I'm going to factor that out, and I get x minus 7 out of the first group here. Again, let's see here. So notice that's in common, so factor it out, and then you multiply it by the remaining factors, the x minus 7, and that's our end result. All right, so we get x minus 7 times x minus 7. All right, and now when it comes to these polynomials here, x squared minus 25 and x squared minus 36, notice there's no middle term. And so when we talked about this, okay, so since there's no middle term, what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite it as x squared plus 0x here. All right, because there's no middle term, and then minus the 25, and then play the number game again. All right, so let's go for it here. So we want to figure out two numbers that multiply the -25 here, -25, and then add to 0. Well, it's got to be 5 times -5, right? Factors of 25 are 5 and 5, but it's negative, so one of them has to be negative. And then when you split the middle term, you're going to have 5x minus 5x, which gives you that middle term of 0. Because guess what? It's not there, right? So we have x squared plus 5x here minus 5x minus the 25. Okay. Notice that 5x minus 5x is 0x because there's no middle term. Again, I'm just splitting the middle term like we did earlier. You always do that when it comes to factor by grouping. And then you factor out the common factor. Okay, again, first group, second group, and you factor out the GCF. So there's an x in common, that's it. So the only thing you can factor out is x. So you have x times x plus 5. Second group, lead term's negative, so factor out a -5, and you're going to get x times x plus 5 again. Distribute through back to check. All right, and then you go ahead and do your factor by grouping by factoring out the common factor, which is x plus 5. Obviously, they're the same. So what do we have? We have x plus 5 as our common binomial times what? Well, the remaining factors, okay, which is x minus 5. So that goes in here. So there's your factoring, x plus 5 times x minus 5. Okay. All right, the same thing goes with the x squared minus 36. So for here, you want to, again, you want to understand that there's no middle term, right? So if there's no middle term, what you guys need to do is think, okay, what two numbers multiply to 36 and add to 0? And we know that 6 times 6 is 36, so one of them has to be negative, right? And we know that 6 plus negative 6 is equal to 0. So when you split the middle term here, you're going to have x squared, right, plus 6x minus 6x, right? They combine to 0, and then bring down the minus 36. And then again, factor by grouping here, so factor out the x. And then on the second group, factor out a negative 6. And when you do that, you get negative 6 times x plus 6. And then factor out the common binomial of x plus 6. Let me just show you that one more time. Just color code things. That's what I always do to help you guys see things. That's what's in common, right? And then you multiply by the remaining factors, which is x minus 6. Okay, there we go. And there's your example of where the lead coefficient is 1. It's fairly straightforward. You just got to play a little number game and get good. All right, now number 6. Let's go to 6. Now when the lead coefficient is not 1, okay, LC is lead coefficient, and it's not 1, it's 5 in this case, you got to adjust the game. So here you multiply 5 times 2 first, right? You multiply the lead coefficient times your constant, and then you have to figure out what two numbers multiply to that. Okay, so 5 times 2 is 10, so what two numbers multiply to 10 and add to negative 11, all right? And so you got to do your factor pairs again. So what two numbers multiply to 10? Well, the factor pairs of 10, let me see, well, it's 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. But they have to add to a negative 11, so I can't use 2 and 5. I'm going to use 1 and 10. And they both have to be negative here. So I'm going to make them both negative. A negative times a negative is a positive. And if you add negative 1 and negative 10, guess what? You get negative 11. All right, so here we go. We're going to split the middle term. So bring down the first term, split the next one here. I'm going to start off with minus 10x here as opposed to a minus 1x, just because I see a common factor between 5 and 10. And then I'm going to write down a minus 1x here and then plus 2. Now out of the first term here, the first group here, again, this is all factored by grouping. I'm going to factor out the 5x here because that's in common, and I get x minus 2. And then I'm going to factor out a negative 1 here out of the second group because that term's negative. So I'm going to get an x minus 2 again. And notice that we have a common binomial. Guess what? It's x minus 2. And that will always happen in factor by grouping. So factor it out and then multiply it by the remaining factors, as we always do. So that's the 5x minus 1. So 5x minus 1 here, and there's your factoring. Okay, now you try it. Do the same thing for the next one here. So pause the video and go ahead and get started, and then press play when you're ready here. Okay, so on this one, we're going to multiply here 2 and 6. So what two numbers multiply to 2 times negative 6, which is negative 12, and then add to 1 here. Okay, so add to 1. That's a 1y in the middle, so the middle coefficient is 1. All right, so the factor pairs of 12. Well, we know that 12 is equal to 1 times 12, or 2 times 6, or 3 times 4. Okay, those are factor pairs, and we need to pick two of them that we can get a 1, right? That add to a 1. So if you use 3 and 4, all right, 3 and 4, and make one of them negative. Okay, make the smaller one negative. Negative 3 times 4 is negative 12, and negative 3 plus 4 is positive 1. All right, there we go. And now just split the middle term. So here we go. As we have 2, let me see, 2y squared. I'm going to start off with the 4y because 2 and 4 have a common factor, and then a minus 3y. So again, you take your numbers that you found here, which are negative 3 and 4. You split the middle term. Right, and the order of those does not matter. You can switch the order if you like. I just put the 4 first because I see a common factor with the 2. So then you factor out a 2y, and you get 2y plus times y plus 2. These two terms are negative, so I'm going to factor out a negative 3, and I get negative 3 times y plus 2. And guess what? The y plus 2 is in common. So I'll get y plus 2, which is your common binomial. Again, common factor just happens to be a binomial, times the remaining terms, all right, the 2y minus 3. And then you're done. And there's your factoring. And factoring is very important because, well, guess what? We have to, solve equations, and you factor to solve. That's one of your main methods. Okay, last one here. Pause the video and get started on this one here. Last one. And when you're ready, press play. Okay, so here we go. So 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. And then what two numbers multiply to that and add to negative 3? Okay, so factor pairs. Factor pairs. Let me see. So 10 is equal to 1 times 10 or 2 times 5. Those are the only factor pairs. But one of them has to be negative. And since I need to add the numbers and get a negative 3, the bigger one has to be negative. All right, so here we go. So 5x squared, I'm going to split the middle term now. I'm going to start off with a minus 5 here because the lead term has a 5 in it and has a common factor. So think about what you're doing when you're doing it right here. So splitting the middle term into two terms, as we always do with a factor by grouping, and then factor out the common factor. So 5, we got to factor out a 5x in this case. So we're going to have 5x times 5x minus 1. Oops, what happened here? Minus 1. Not sure what happened. And then the next one here, there's a 2 in common, so factor that out. And guess what? X minus 1 is in common. And then you factor that out, and you get 5 times 5x plus 2. Okay? So again, let me just show you what I just did here, re-explain. The x minus 1 is in common, and then you always multiply it by the remaining terms, which is 5x plus 2. All right, and that is the entire lesson or review over the last 2 weeks. Okay, we spent 2 weeks developing this. All right, and then on our current lesson, we are solving equations where I set this equal to 0, and we use the zero product rule. Okay, but you can't solve quadratic equations with factoring unless you know how to factor. So this is really important, and if you understand all of this, then solving an equation that is set equal to 0 when you know its factors is easy. All right, and that's lesson, well, the previous one here that we're working on here. Let's see, this one, when we were talking about how to solve quadratics using factoring. And so look at all these examples here. This is what we're doing in class, which all involves factoring. So get good at the factoring so you can actually solve a quadratic equation, which has some major applications in physics. Okay, we'll talk about that more later. Okay, so right back, let's go back to the mind map here. There we go. So again, print off another copy like I just showed you right through here. Do it again, but this time on your own, and then correct yourself and get good and do your best. Okay, and I'll see you in class. You guys take care.